The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Baroudis.
Welcome back to a special edition of The Discourse. Today, we're trying something a little different. We're going to take you on a journey through history on the one thing Alberta political parties can agree on, and it's not Taylor Swift. For 100 years, Alberta political parties have agreed there is no place for rats in this province.
Okay, weird you said that because I'm not a Swiftie, but I will say I'm super excited about this episode. This is something that I've always been like, really? We see billboards about rat on rats and all of this, and it's like, how is this a thing? So in this episode, we're going to talk about how, the why, and we are delighted to have an expert on the show later to answer all of our questions.
And just before we get to that, I did want to share just a little bit of listener feedback with you because I sent out a tweet about this upcoming show asking people, how many rats do you think are in Alberta? And the replies that we got tell you so much about our audience. So just for starters, Tyler Dawson says, per the government website, 450 sightings, 23 of which were rats. The majority were muskrats. Thank you for that, Tyler. And in answer to whether there are rats in Alberta, Ken Bosencool says, literally, no. Practically, yes. Politically, debatable. And Sharon Coward asked, are we talking rats or rats? And it seems this may have tripped a few people up when they saw my question. Erica, do you want to read the next one?
Sure. Let me read the one that shits on progressives and has me swearing. So Faizad says, and this is his quote, not mine, every fucking out-of-touch liberal progressive Alberta NDP member/voter qualifies. So I'd say hundreds of thousands, unfortunately. Look at how many supporters he gave you, though, like hundreds of thousands.
I know,
so
I did
positive.
Like that part. Faizad, thank you for that very thoughtful feedback. And finally, Anna says there is at least one in the legislature.
I wanted to fill in the blank, but I recused myself of getting involved in X because it doesn't really love me very much. So, folks, in case you didn't catch on, we are not talking about political rats, much to some of our viewers' anticipation. We're talking about literal rats. Like, think Splinter from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's all I've been thinking about this whole lead up to this episode is like little Splinter. Anyways, I digress.
Okay, so let's talk big picture here. In the global battle for pest control, few stories rival the drama, the persistence, and the sheer audacity of Alberta's battle against rats. For as long as humans have cultivated food, stored grain, and built cities, rats have been there. And these unwelcome rodents are remarkably adaptable, they're intelligent, and they are incredibly reproductive. So from ancient days to present times, the war against rats has shaped the world's agriculture, public health, and urban planning in very profound ways.
And a quick little crash course on our little friends. Rats have been around for millions of years. Ancient civilization documented their struggles with rats. Cats were domesticated for this very purpose, but despite our best efforts, rats thrived. When ships began to cross the ocean, rats spread worldwide, and as colonial powers expanded, and so did the unfortunate rat population.
So by the 18th century, rats were everywhere. Paris brought in professional rat catchers, and London established a rat reduction plan, but still, the rat population grew. So today, nearly every jurisdiction in the world that is livable is inhabited by rats, save for one triumphant and rare victory, Alberta.
What a beautiful map that is, where it's like cold as fuck locations where no one lives, and then beautiful blue, Tory blue Alberta, where we see there's no inhabitants. So is this for real, and how does this happen? And how did Alberta become and remain the rat-free haven that we call home today?
Well, it's not like there aren't any sightings.
Well, it was actually back, random fact, in 1950s that the first rat was spotted. And I know both you and I have watched a few docuseries on the rats since we knew we were going to do this podcast. but they were spotted at the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. The government at the time knew that if we let rats run free in Alberta, it would ravage our grain economy, and so we fought back. Before you go, Cheryl, all I've been thinking about, and I might be like, did you watch Simpsons growing up?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you remember that episode when Bart and the family go to Australia and he takes like a bullfrog or something, and then he like brings it into this new habitat and they go rampant and they all reproduce. And then like at the end, they're leaving Australia or New Zealand, and they're like, these kangaroos are putting bullfrogs in. They just have like overpopulated and overtaken. This is what I think rats would do if they were allowed in Alberta. They would just be everywhere, and it would be like that Simpsons episode. So anyways, that's between that and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I'm clearly like born in the 80s.
Well, we're going to have a little more insight from our expert in a few minutes. But
that wasn't insightful?
That was like expert analysis if I've ever heard it. But first, just a bit more on Alberta's background. What set Alberta apart was its use of law enforcement in its anti-rat campaign. So in 1950, the Agriculture Pests Act declared rats a noxious pest. It became illegal to own, harbor, or transport rats in Alberta, and the government created what is called the Rat Control Zone, which is a 600-kilometer stretch and 30 kilometers wide buffer along the Saskatchewan border. And that rat control zone became like basically ground zero for the war on rats. Every farm, every building, every piece of land within that zone was subject to intense scrutiny. And what I want to know is it still under scrutiny today? So armed with government funding, inspectors just patrolled that zone. They searched for signs of rats. Farmers were, there was a campaign to educate farmers on rat behavior and it instructed them to get rid of food and shelter sources. And then the province brought in poison, traps, professional exterminators, all free of charge for those farmers. The policy was absolutely zero tolerance. It was uncompromising, and any suspected infestation was reported and then dealt with, if you know what I mean, immediately.
And because I'm the unfiltered one, what she means is they were killed, eliminated, given poison, whatever needed. It was not like put you in a trap and carry you over a border back into Saskatchewan. I was like, sorry, you're gross.
Let me believe that was the case.
Yeah, it was like, it was real aggressive. And so this idea and point of pride for Alberta has been ingrained in our conscious. Like, I don't know what else, like, we could all be like legacy piece for us here. It's that we're rat free. We rat on rats. We have a campaign every year. Kids in Alberta are taught about the dangers of rats. Like, these things are just like not liked. No sport team will ever be called the like X rats as an Alberta team because of how much we've talked about the importance of keeping them away. And they've been media campaigns, as we mentioned, and countless press releases of our pride. It's like what unites Alberta is our anti-rats. And the message has been clear, like that rats are everyone's problem. So it's what unites us, Cheryl.
I love that. I love that it has not only cut across political parties, but it has cut across decades. Like there are so few constants in Alberta in terms of things that are carried over from one government to the next over the course of decades, over demographics changing in Alberta. But our successful fight and defiance of rats has carried through generations in Alberta.
And like when you think about think growing up, you're like, oh, you can't rat on that person. Like, that's bad. You know, you're such a like baby, all this stuff. And now we're like, rat on rats. Like, you see a rat, you call. And there's like actually a line to call. There's actually a group of patrollers that's job is to take care or deal with, for those listening, I was doing quotations to make it a little bit more PG than maybe like poison them as their job. Like, it's kind of crazy that we put the resources and efforts, but I also get the impacts that it can have on farms, on other industries across our province. So just interested on why Saskatchewan doesn't have it as an aggressive approach to rid the rats that we do.
You know, because I was reading up about rats and Alberta, Alberta is sort of like uniquely positioned in terms of our geography. Like we have a mountain range on one side. Obviously, the rats aren't going through there. To the north, we have conditions that are largely unlivable for rats. And then to the south, it's just like wide open plains, which is, there's not enough sustenance for rats to grow their population and sustain life there. And then Saskatchewan. So we really just have this one part of the border to defend.
I was watching the same docuseries, and it was, just like this strip of red where it's like, this is the rat zone. But my dad, lived in Louisiana for a really long time. The rats there are like huge and gross, and they're like in your sewer systems, like total Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But they're also in like rafters and stuff. And like, I think we don't realize how like big rats truly are and like what they carry, their reproduction. Like, you kind of get one. And I know that there's been some sightings that people have probably ratted on, but like places like garbage sites or places where they can reproduce and thrive, I guess, in an environment. But that like it hasn't grown beyond that is kind of boggling. Like, it's kind of surreal that like, regardless, like you said, the government or what, that we're all like, get rid of those rats.
Yeah. And like, truthfully, like, it's not like the rats can see the border and they're just like, that's Alberta, got to turn around.
That's what I've been wondering. It's like, how do you decide?
But like, I think the idea is that rats don't, like, they don't live here. They don't reproduce here. Like, theoretically, we catch them before they really, like, the population grows in Alberta. It's not that they never cross the border. It's just that we catch them when they do.
Yeah. So it's like a full community effort of like getting in front of the problem, making sure that they can't reproduce. We won't go through the gory details of what happens, but they are dealt with.
And we are so lucky and pleased to be joined today by a specialist who knows a lot more about this than Erica and I do, despite all our Googling. Karen Wickerson is a rat and pest control expert. Karen, thank you for coming on the Discourse.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Do you want to jump into it,
You
Erica?
go first.
Okay.
I always interrupt Cheryl, so.
I have so many questions. But first of all, maybe you could just tell us, we've done our Googling, we watched some videos, we sort of, looked at the history of rat control in Alberta, but tell us about, what the actual apparatus is in the government and how we have had this long and storied history as a rat-free jurisdiction in a world with no rat-free jurisdictions.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? I'd have to say, I think we saw them coming and we were prepared. So by the time they hit the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border in 1920, it took them 30 years to get to the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. And in that time, we were prepared. And by that time, we had legislation. So when they arrived at the border, the government knew that, they could cause a lot of damage, either to agriculture, spread disease, certainly damage to infrastructure as well. And they declared them a pest. And that means that every Albertan is required by law to control them.
Okay, that's something new. We did not, I don't think we covered, or at least I didn't see that it's like once you're a pest, you're on the hit list. So maybe talk us through, like, I call in and I say, hello, I found a rat, and it's an actual rat, because I understand that a lot of people that call, it may or may not be a rat, but we'll get to that. Maybe talk about like what that process looks like from the time I call to report a rat.
Yeah, so we always ask people to, if they can, send a photo. That way we can confirm whether it actually is a rat or not. And then from there, what we do is we contact the pest control officer in the municipality where that report resides. And another great thing with the legislation is we have to have a designated pest control officer in each municipality. So I know who to phone, and we'll ask them to investigate for us.
So someone in that municipality, wherever the sighting was, gets a call. You call them up and you're like, listen, it's possible there's a rat here. And they literally go there to check the rat out.
Yeah.
And then make sure the rat is no longer there.
Yeah. They'll report back to me. And most of the time, it isn't. And most of the time, the rats that make their way into the province are single rats that have hitchhiked on vehicles. So if they've hopped on a vehicle in BC or Saskatchewan and made their way to Alberta, we're looking at a 6 to 8 hour drive. By the time they get here, they're hot, dehydrated, hungry. So most often they are found deceased or fairly close to being deceased.
So we know that because we had a bunch of people comment on our Twitter saying, there's a ton of rat sightings in Alberta, but most of them are not rats. So what are Albertans thinking are rats that are not actually rats?
Yeah, well, I would say the most common offending critter is the muskrat, which, has rat in the name. It's a rodent as well, a larger rodent. People often see them as they're, driving home from work or, like either the Anthony Henday in Edmonton or Stony Trail in Calgary, and they'll be trotting along the side of the road during the daylight. And people, think it looks like a rodent. Could be a rat. So I'm going to take a photo and report it.
Like a citizen's arrest. They're on it. Talk about I know before we started airing, we were sharing that I see one of these rat on rats ad campaign along the Yellowhead. You said that there's a few more going to be popping up, not rats, but the billboards across the province. Can you talk about like what goes into and the importance of like keeping up with not having rats from a brand and reputation, and where we can expect to see some more billboards?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this campaign because we are partnering with the Alberta Invasive Species Council, who received a grant to do this. And my biggest thing is I've been doing this role for close to 5 years now, and so many new people have moved to Alberta from other parts of Canada, say, or the world, and they don't know about our program. They don't know that we don't allow rats. We're rat-free. We have a program. So, this is just reaching a broader audience because historically the program has been agriculturally based, and we've done a really good job in the rural areas promoting it. But this now, like these billboards you're talking about, there's a bunch around the Edmonton area and then a bunch around the Calgary area. People are going to see these. So we're really going to reach people in the urban areas.
So, Karen, when I look at the map, like when you look at the map of where rats live in the world, and then there's like this one little square where Alberta is that is not inhabited by rats. First of all, like as an Albertan born and raised, I feel so proud of our little blue square in the map. But I do wonder, like when we talk about like as a reputation piece, like when we talk about Alberta, it's the only livable place where we don't have rats. What do you think that gets Alberta? Like in terms of, when we tell the world we don't have rats here, what kind of like cred does that give us?
Admiration, I'll say that. I've traveled into the U.S. I take courses, rodent academies. And I was just in New York last week at one. And as you know, New York is could be the rat capital of the world. And I find they often look at us in disbelief as well. I mean, these jurisdictions that, have large populations of rats that they are having difficult controlling. They just, they have a hard time believing it. But I have to say too, as far as Albertans, they're so proud of the fact. I can't tell you how many calls I've taken or reports where people will say, I know that Alberta doesn't allow rats, and I saw a rat yesterday, and it was at the corner of this intersection, and they'll send me a pin drop of, they don't have a photo of the critter, but yeah, they send a pin drop of, this is where it was. So, they feel they have this duty to report.
Well, we think it's beautiful because I think as we've shared, our podcast is a lot of us disagreeing, and we're like so fascinated by this. This is something that I think unites Albertans. I'm from Saskatchewan, so I feel I'm like less proud, a little bit shameful that I'm like the gateway. My border is the gateway to get into the province. But maybe talk about the investment that the province makes to make sure that we stay rat free and what that looks like.
Yeah. So, for such a well-known large program or a program that, can be in the public eye, the cost is estimated about $500,000 a year. We have 2 employees within the government, and then we provide funds to the border, so the rat control zone, where we still actually check all along the border, all the sites for the first 8 kilometers westward into Alberta. So certainly there's funding for that. So that is, 2 employees and all the supplies that we need.
Okay, so when I picture someone, it's like walking up and down the border, like marching, checking. for rats. What does that actually look like? So I don't let my imagination wander about like what actual border control of rats is.
Yeah, I've had people ask me like, so when you receive a report, does that mean you hop in your Ratmobile and the lights go out and
That
you're
would be
driving up?
awesome.
I think we should invest in that.
Yeah, yeah. So what it means is that, the pest control officers along the 6 municipalities that are part of the rat control zone along the border, they go out spring and fall, and they drive from farmyard to farmyard, and go in, and they know the areas that are high risk if rats were brought into the farm or have traveled to the farm, so they know what areas to look for.
What are the risks of rats? Like, what is the challenge? I mean, I think we obviously by default can imagine the farm, but even with those large and urban centers we're seeing, like, what is the risk of not holding up our rat-free province?
Yeah. Wow. A lot. I think. As I said, I was just in New York City, and the challenges they face. People who've lived with rats for their whole life. I don't want to say they can become almost complacent, or it's just, they're there. So, it's a real challenge. I think we wouldn't probably have that much of a challenge if we did have an infestation in an urban area in the province. People would be motivated to get rid of them. But the risk, I think the risk is high, like the damage to infrastructure that happens, the damage to green spaces, the threat of disease from spread to, animals, domestic or wild animals to humans, and certainly damage to agriculture, the stored feed, what their urine and feces does to that. So, I don't have a number to estimate how much we save by having the program, but, we can guess that it would be millions and millions of dollars.
Karen, how long have you done this job for?
It will be 5 years in January.
And it's such a unique job. How do you personally, how has your personal relationship with rats? I don't mean that in they must mean something specific to you, because it's like your whole career right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The more I learn about them, the more I admire them, right? They are a pest, but they're very smart. They are an invasive species. One of the most impressive invasive species. They've spread all around the world. They're highly adaptable to any environment. So they do need to live near humans, really, to survive. They live off our garbage and live in our structures. But I do greatly admire them.
Is there such thing as like rat protests? Like, is there anyone out there being like, we want the rats?
Yeah,
or,
I know
them?
there are people that want pet rats allowed in Alberta, because we do not allow pet rats, and so I think that's probably the closest we come. Is people,
they're not like, let them roam the streets,
right? Yeah.
I'd like to know who these people are.
Karen, maybe before we let you go, now you've been in this job for 5 years. Is there anything about it, or maybe it's everything, that has surprised you?
Goodness. I'd have to say I did not grow up in Alberta, so I've lived here almost 30 years now, but didn't know much about the program before I started the job. I just thought it was really interesting, and I had worked with rats previously in an academic setting, but so for me, it touching on that pride that Albertans feel about the program. Like they go to great lengths to try and figure out how to report a rat. And I think that's pretty incredible. Not a lot of provinces have something like this where you can unite everybody on. So I think, that's kind of been, what has surprised me the most.
Oh, that's awesome. That. Karen, can you just tell everyone, so in case they live in Alberta and they don't know how to report a rat, what they do need, like how they do it or where they need to go to get that information?
Yeah, so we have a reporting email that is monitored 7 days a week, and it is rats@gov.ab.ca. We encourage people, if they can, safely take a photo of the critter or any evidence. That could be feces or what people may think is a nest, and send to us. And certainly we will respond to them and go from there. They can also, if they would like to, phone 310 Farm as well to report a rat sighting.
Thank you. Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on our show today and giving us all this information about Alberta's very successful rat program. And thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, there you have it. In a world where rats thrive almost everywhere, Alberta, on brand, stands as a defiant outlier. That's our show. We'll be back next Thursday morning with our last episode of 2024.
And who would have thought for less, like not even $500,000, we could find something that we all believe we should invest in as a province. We unite behind our desire to remain rat-free, and we continue to rat on rats now and into the future. So don't forget to follow us on TikTok, X, and Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.